I feel like the podcast is like the most delicious nugget of my work. If people were listening and thinking like, what would we ever hire Emily to do? It would be like this, 10x. Like my job is to create a space for people to tell the truth. We are closing out our series of listener faves with the most downloaded episode from season 1. This one is very personal because the tables get turned and I become the interviewee. On the other mic is my partner, Arnie. So, if this conversation was somehow powerful for Who's Missing listeners, whew, it was definitely 10x that for me. We get into the birth of this podcast, how it came at the darkest time of my life, and how I found a path to access joy. I still have dark times. And that's a lot of what Who's Missing offers. How we get through it is what makes us pretty remarkable. Enjoy.
I'm sure a lot of people that listen are already familiar with you and your work, but there might be listeners who aren't. And so, you've worn many hats over the years, many different professions. And I think it's sort of a fascinating journey.
Well, should I start crying now?
Let's do, okay. I don't know.
It's starting to come up.
Okay. Oh, gosh, already.
Because I'm looking into your eyes.
Oh, well, that's very sweet.
Okay. So, whoops. Yeah, it's...
Do you want to take a moment? I'm sorry if you need to.
No. I'm proud of the tears. I want people to hear... I think people who know me know I don't really have anything to hide. And I also think vulnerability is a gift. So, being vulnerable in this way and talking about what this podcast sort of represents is important to me because I think so often we see people kind of the culmination of somebody's work and the output. And, I personally appreciate hearing about how people that I really admire also struggle and have pain in their lives. I feel like the thing I've been saying a lot lately is I love my life probably more than I ever have in my whole life. And life is hard. And I think it's like, where do you choose to put the effort, the hard? Because I think it's a choice. So the podcast was an idea like 5 years ago. And I think I just feel strongly that no person on the planet, no human being is an interruption, is an inconvenience, is expendable. And so the converse of that is like, or the inverse of that is like, everyone has some value. And so I think it's obvious that some people have value because they're out front. And I think in this first season, most of the people I talk to have a presence, you could say, but some of the people don't. And I think as we go into subsequent seasons, I might even be more interested in like people who don't have a presence and like a following and like, people know their story.
I mean, it seems the name of the podcast, Who's Missing, it sort of seems implied by that, who are we not hearing from?
Who are we not hearing from? And who would you maybe not have access to hearing from were it not for me making an introduction? I mean, one of the things when I talk to people, it's like immediately the synapses in my brain are like, you need to talk to this person. Because I'm ultimately on a mission for people to feel like less alone. And when I started recording this podcast, it just so happened it was at a time in my life when I was suicidal. really struggling with the question of like, who am I?
Yeah.
You know? And it just so happened that like the first day we recorded, and it's so funny, Christina, who is our producer, I remember that day was actually the day that I had ideation and a plan. And it just so happened, like, and it's, I don't care if you believe in anything, but for me, it was like, were it not for having to show up for her to record the episode, I don't know what would have happened. I don't have premonitions of anything, but it was our relationship and my deep love and affection for my team and the people I work with and relationships in general that I was like, I'm not going to cancel this. I have to show up for it. Which ultimately was like a decision point as I was like pacing around my kitchen, feeling completely outside of myself, to be like, I have to show up for her because I love her. So, this whole podcast isn't like, just trust me, listeners, like not every episode was I suicidal. But it's important to me that people know that even someone like me, whatever that means, a mental health clinician or someone who has an astonishing amount of support in her life. And at the time, we were in a relationship together and I had this team, that I still found myself in a place where I wasn't sure I could keep going, and I think the only thing that really distinguishes me from someone who might follow through on a plan to end their life is that I talked about it with people. I wasn't going through it in isolation, and I knew that it wasn't an option. Like, I just knew. And so I said to myself, like, absolutely not. And I had been there before 10 years ago. All that is to say, I think part of the podcast is about who's missing. It's also about like, what are we not talking about? I love asking people questions that maybe are seemingly unrelated to like a traditional interview, but people are willing to kind of go there. And in fact, I think want to be asked. I still, as I said when we started, like, I have nothing to hide. And I'm proud of how I've lived my life, but I'm also completely and totally imperfect and struggle, and take medication and go to therapy and all the things, as a way, I think, to model like everyone should have a line item in their budget that's like self-love, And I ask my guests about that, like, what does that look like for you? Because it's such a deeply personal thing. So it began 5 years ago. It was recorded in a dark time initially, and it's been a part of how I've been healing, I think. I'm going to blow my nose.
Please do.
Great.
Trying to decide if it's best to dig more into that journey for you in parallel with the podcast, or if it makes more sense to sort of go back to kind of...
To when I was born.
To
you
when
want to
you were
start
born?
1979-ish, maybe?
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
I think we'll get back to sort of your journey through making the podcast.
Yeah.
But why don't we take a step back and talk about the work that you've done professionally that kind of led you here? You worn a lot of different hats over the years.
Yeah, sometimes I feel this is funny for people, I think, to know. Like, when I introduce you to people, I sort of have like 3 very defined bullet points of what I say, and people immediately kind of get it.
Really? Oh, I need those.
And
and are you saying that you don't have those 3 bullet points?
I'm saying you don't.
Oh, I see. I don't have them for you.
Right. And I think you're not alone. Like, I think when people think about, and maybe this is like, I don't know, pompous to say, but I think it's hard to describe the work of helping people through a process. Like, it's just, there's no discrete outcome. There's no real way to measure it. And I'm okay with that. But I think, when people wonder about like, well, what's the work you do? Like, if I had to globally say it, it's basically this podcast. Like, this is what I do. what I'm uniquely qualified to do is ask great questions that sort of move things forward. And sometimes go back, but ultimately, in the name of like progress and possibility, right? So that's like the unifier. So I feel like the podcast is like like the most delicious nugget of my work because it's accessible and it's also, if people were listening and thinking like, what would we ever hire Emily to do? It would be like this, 10x. Like my job is to create a space for people to tell the truth. That's kind of what I do. So the meandering path is, I don't even think it's meandering. Like it's always been that. I mean, my parents said to me I couldn't be a police officer and I couldn't be a teacher because they were both teachers and they just, the bureaucracy in Chicago public school systems is what it is. And I think they, of course, like any parent wanted more for me, whatever that means. No shade to teachers, but, like try something else. And lo and behold, here I am. Like I'm facilitating all the time, but I think it's not so much a departure from being a teacher, what I do overall. And the mental health clinician part of me, I'm a wounded healer. I became a therapist after my first time touching the void, I switched careers and went from making plenty of money to making like $20,000 a year at age 30, which was really hard. And then, went to graduate school and was like deep in my eating disorder and like got through it somehow. And my first go round in therapy was with kids. And I remember just being like, this is such important work to just hold space and not drive. And that's fucking scary. It's like someone said to me yesterday, and, I know I'm not technically an improviser, but like every room I walk in, I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm okay with that. Like, that's part of what excites me about what I do, because I don't purport to be the expert or like the person that knows the best way forward. I just know I'm really good at co-creating along the way, so the podcast every episode is a co-creation.
So to go back slightly.
Yes.
When you introduced me, there are 3 bullet points that you use. What are the 3 bullet points I should use to introduce you?
I think the first one is she is a mental health clinician and someone who lives with mental illness. She is someone who is gifted at asking questions in contexts where they don't get asked because bureaucracy or routine or the pace of life doesn't allow for that. And I think like I'm a facilitator. I facilitate connection and I facilitate trust. And I do that primarily within a corporate context. And I've decided very explicitly to use my gifts in that setting because I think based on my previous careers, I have experience working in corporate. And I think it's the place that needs the most stretching in that way. So that's what I would say about me. I mean, I'm also like, anytime I say the 3 things, I feel like it's wholly unsatisfying because people are like, wait, what? Still talk to me about it. So maybe if anyone's listening, they can give me branding advice, but that's what comes to me. I bet if you asked me tomorrow, I'd give you 3 different things. And maybe that's not good. I don't know.
How about this?
Okay.
Tomorrow I'll ask you again. We'll record it and we'll put it at the end.
Great. Let's do it. That'll give me a chance to think about it and make it perfect. But that's the thing. Like, here, I have a successful business without ever having to be like, I take your talent strategy from 10% return on your engagement results to 20%. So I guess it's like inconsequential to me to be able to, but I guess I should.
That's a good question. That sort of, I don't know if this is too in the weeds or not. You tell me.
Probably.
What do you feel like with your facilitating?
Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest difference between what the clients often assume it's going to be and what it is.
Well, they assume it's going to follow the agenda that they have in front of them. And it does. But I think they assume that the outcome is going to happen in the room. And what really happens is it starts there and then sort of all the magic happens in between sessions, you know? So there's an assumption that like, I'm going to make something happen. And I think the reality is that something does happen. It's just there's no way for us to predict what it's going to be. So part of the tension, I think, is really like with every client that I have, building that trust to be like, I've got a plan. I'll show you the deck. Here's the timestamps of what I think this will take. And let's see what happens. Because it's really risky. Like, I think that the leaders who decide to have any kind of facilitated work from the outside come into their organization are really brave, because it's a roll of the dice. Here's the thing. It's a roll of the dice that returns every time. And I'm just going to say it. Transforming people's lives. So is it a roll of the dice in that, you know, the measurement is a little different than maybe some like skills-based training, but it builds community in such a way that, I mean, the return is, I don't know, it's just impossible to ignore. It's funny, I'm feeling bored talking about this.
Oh, okay. Well, then we should talk about something else.
No, because, and bored is not the right word. I don't know if you get this feeling ever, but like when you feel like you're selling something versus like...
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And it feels like I'm now moving into a sales piece versus...
Feeling slightly less off. You're not feeling as authentic as you want to feel in this moment.
Well, yeah, because the podcast isn't about that. And it sort of explicitly is like not about the Collective Academy and not about leadership necessarily even, or facilitating, because I think if I start in that place, which I do, you know, and can, I like, you're going to be buying a product. You're not going to be buying sort of the way that I like to work. So it just doesn't feel great in this moment to talk about like what we do.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, look, it seems like you could do a podcast about like, hey, this is how I facilitate, this is what I do. And I'm sure that would be an excellent podcast. But this is something different. This is, you know, more organic and authentic one-on-one conversations with people. And you, more than almost anyone I know, you know a lot of people. And you just seem to connect very quickly with everyone you meet. Even like people you're not meeting, you're just sort of like in a space with, and you're like, you're interesting. Sort of bring them into your orbit.
Yeah, we were traveling recently. Where were we? Wisconsin. Where did we go? Michigan. And, you know, there's a variety of ways to like figure out where you're going to go for breakfast. Most of them are in your hand, right? Like your phone. And I just think like a compass, map, good handheld map,
divining rod.
Maybe you're actually holding breakfast in your hand.
Yeah, and you're like, here's where I'm going for breakfast right here.
Right, I have an Egg McMuffin. What are you talking about? I'm putting this in my mouth. I like to move through the world in conversation. I mean, it's just sort of unsatisfying to me to like see what the ether says. I really would rather be like the checkout person, I think, at the grocery store. I was like, where do you guys go for breakfast? And one guy said something, and then there was like +1, this other guy, and then he was like, well, do you want fancy? And or like diner? And I was like, definitely diner. I don't know that we went to that place, just to be fair. Because it was closed. It was Monday. Yeah. We tried, but that's how I get to know the world, I think, is like, and then you wind up having a conversation that just feels authentically led versus like, I don't know where to go and I don't know what's best. And yeah, I just prefer like life to kind of meander through touchstones and connections. But I mean, I've never been shy. I've never really felt particularly lonely about connecting. I've felt shy and lonely in my life, but like it's to me, reaching through and connecting is my gift. And it's, very rarely in my life have I not been able to do that. In fact, like what I'm working on right now is like not being as helpful and not being as connected because I'm putting down roots with you. And like I want to be around you and I want to be close to my mom and I want to be close to my team. And like, I don't have infinite energy, I really don't. And like, honestly, my experience this spring with mental illness was a result of like, if I had to like think about why it happened, I don't know why, that's the truth, but depletion. And it wasn't just like physically depleted because I wasn't sleeping at the time. There's so many ways to be depleted. And the podcast, like I said, was part of like, it's rejuvenating. And I get to see Christina and I get to talk to people who are interesting. And I remember we would like click off of episodes and I'd be like, who's next? Let's just keep this moving all day. All day I could talk to people.
When you put together the roster of people for season 1,
yeah,
how did you decide who you wanted to talk to?
Well, I remember you and I were having dinner or lunch on Devon. And I remember saying to you, God, I cannot find any men to talk to. But I was like having an easier time thinking of like women that inspire me, who identify as women. And I remember you saying like, well, we hear from men plenty. Yeah. So, who cares? Yeah. Right.
Already the amount that they're hearing my voice in this episode is too much.
And so how did I pick? It was pretty intuitive. I just thought about who do I want to talk to that I haven't talked to in a while. And the first season is really people I know or have some sort of, connection to in the real world. The second season probably won't be as close in terms of like the concentric circles of community, or maybe it will. I don't know. I don't know if this will be helpful to hear or not, but like I didn't have a strategic plan going into this. I wasn't in any way calculated about who do I want to talk to. People would come to mind. I was thinking very much about diversity, thinking about diversity in age, which is why you'll hear from a teenager. You'll hear from my mom, who's 83. I was thinking about diversity in background. When we interviewed Dr. Murphy at the Detroit Zoo, it's like, who, how, when do you ever get to talk to the CEO of a zoo? And interviewing Todd, one of my best friends, talk about someone who inspires me. He's literally been the wagon I've hitched myself to kind of get to where I am today. I credit him with a lot of what I know about business and how to do this. So it's like, it was just who came to top of mind first without overthinking it, which would have prevented, I think, all of us from like not even doing it, like not even getting started on that. So for better or for worse, it was thought out and not overthought.
What were the things that surprised you the most, either in individual episodes or just of the process itself?
I'd be curious what Christina would say as like the listener. It's interesting as the interviewer. So one thing would be every interview, I would tell Christina, this is too short. Like, I want more. So I don't know if everyone's going to have that experience, but I got to talk to them for a whole hour and I wanted more. It surprised me that I was like, this is not enough time. Like, I want to keep talking to you. And then hearing the episodes being like, wait, no, more. Like, I want more questions. I feel like there's more story here. And that's just, typical Emily Drake. Like, I can't get enough. But that surprised me. I think it also, it surprises me. I suppose that people consider it like an honor or a privilege to be interviewed. And I take that really seriously. Like someone's story, because this is like real life stuff, is in like the archive now. And that isn't a throwaway item for me. I sort of think about it as like, The episode we did with Elise Agnello, she talked about her family a lot. And it's like, God, I would love for her to be able to forward this to her family, for them to be proud of her, but also just to feel like, oh, I can hear her voice. I can hear her story anytime I want. So that surprised me that I was a docent in a way, but I guess it shouldn't because that's what I do. But that people were really quite tickled by it. I'm really careful when people are like, how did you start your business? I was like, I didn't. I jumped into the arms of someone else and I took it from there. How did you start your podcast? I didn't. I mean, Christina and to some extent Christine made this possible because I was a fucking mess for the first probably 2 months we were recording. I mean, I just was in a state, getting the help I needed, but not doing much else other than that. So I say all of that to say, like, I'm surprised how much work it takes. And also that the product that people are going to hear is just a small sort of part of what it takes to do something creative, what it takes to launch something, I mean, it just takes a lot, I'm so grateful that I get to do it. It feels like a privilege. I give you a lot. When you ask me a question, so you'll just have to be like,
All right.
cut. That is too. I don't do sound bites.
So now for my third question. Now, this has all been great. I mean,
Good.
I feel like I could jump in with more questions, but I would only derail what the interesting things that you're already saying. I mean, I don't know if this is maybe something that you experience while interviewing people. A big part of interviewing is getting out of the way.
Yeah.
And teasing out threads, but also letting people speak, because oftentimes the interesting thing comes later in the answer,
Yeah. I don't think I'm great at that.
You don't
I
think you're great at
season
leaving
2 I'll
space?
be better. Yeah. Because I get the guests are so interesting to me. I remember when my mom and I listened to the first cut of the first episode and she was like, you talk too much. And I was like, I definitely do. I definitely do. So I've been working on that actually. I aspire to be a better interviewer. I don't even think I'm a great interviewer. I think I have good questions and I think I really care about the answers and I really listen. And it's like almost this, you're like, people get to experience if they listen to this, like me getting better at something, like I'm not automatically good at interviewing and I'm okay with that. It's like maybe that's a skill I want to develop and maybe it isn't, but it is a skill that, I mean, the greats like Terry Gross, it's like, and you're doing a great job. You're doing
Well,
such a great job.
Look, I wasn't going to say it, but everybody says it. Terry Gross and Arnie Niekamp. Those are the two titans of the medium. Look, obviously, Terry Gross first. No question.
No question.
But then Arnie Niekamp.
Right.
And his silly jokes.
Right. Do you know why I chose you to interview me?
I was available.
You actually weren't, to be fair. We had to reschedule.
I am difficult to book.
Do you know why? I mean, can you imagine why? I don't even know if I know why.
Can I imagine why?
Yeah.
If you don't know why, I
mean, I do know why. I appreciate that being an interviewer is a responsibility. Yeah.
Especially, I feel like a podcast like this, there is an importance of making sure that your guest is in good hands. Being thoughtful about the situations maybe that your guests are put into, But also, I think, there's barking.
It's great. Sometimes there's barking.
But sometimes there's barking.
That's the way it is in studio, second floor studio.
Second floor studio. But also it's important that there's a sense of play.
Yeah. Oh,
which
totally.
is good. And I wonder if that's the part that you worry you're talking too much. The sense of play, though, is fun. It's, I know the podcast I listen to, over time, the subject matter is less important than I just like spending time with the people that are talking.
Yeah, I think that's part of what I hope guests feel is that I enjoy spending time with them. What's so funny about it is like these are people that I think are interesting. Honest to God, we could ask our neighbor Paula to come on and I would think she's interesting.
She seems interesting.
She's very interesting. Careful with like, you know, the proximity bias, even with like people around you that you think you know. And I remember working in an office once, and you know, we talk about like open door policy all the time, right? You can come and ask me anything. And I remember I would go into my boss, and I was like, "You don't want me to be here?" Like you can feel it, right? When people are like, "Yeah, how can I help you?" You know, it's like, "Oh, okay, well, I guess I better make this quick." Like nobody's coming to you to be useless, you know? So I don't know. It just, to me, wanting to spend time with people and hear what they have to say and just be in conversation is, I think it's a scary thing for some people. I know it's a scary thing for some people, but I would say like do it in a way that feels authentic to you. And for me, in this season of my life, it was like, I'm going to do a podcast.
Have you always been this outgoing? Can you point to a period of time in your life where you became the person that can kind of talk to anybody?
So the answer is yes. And then it was no for a while, and then it was yes. So yeah, I mean, I began this way. I'm at a point in my life, you know, just for today, that I am the most myself. So it's kind of this integrated, like who I was when I was a kid and, you know, my emerging adulthood and all that. It feels right now like there's nothing that's unexpressed. I mean, I attribute a lot of that to you and our relationship and being able to be myself in partnership, romantic partnership.
Okay.
Go on.
I'm listening. So.
I will say this, you know, when I was a kid, we went camping every summer, and I'm an only child, as most people know, and you know, so it was me and my parents sitting on a bench seat in a Chevy Silverado driving across the country and camping and hanging out because they were off on the summers too. And I'd get to the campground and I was like a beacon for kids, like just like, where are the kids? I'm going to go find the kids. And I would gather them up and we would do stuff. And I made my fun, like I made my family, you know, in those instances. And so over time, because life is what it is, like it gets beaten out of you. It's like not beaten, but it gets extracted slowly over time. You know, we get more discerning, we get more fearful, we get more. And I think part of my story, you know, is especially in my late 20s and 30s was like really inauthentic living, just trying to like play the part, but not really being the person that I was playing, which is fucking exhausting. And when I came into entrepreneurship, that's kind of when it started. I think it started to turn back to being authentic. When I got divorced, I became even more myself, you know, after this season of my life and, you know, reconnecting with you and like being in our relationship and the business change. Like I've been through so many things that it's not an option to go back. So the only way is to like go forward and get better. But the culmination of the things that I've been through also tell me that I can go through more things, right? It's resilience. So yeah, have I always been outgoing? No. But is it the truest essence of who I am? Yes. And the moment that I'm like, the phone rings and I'm like, I don't want to talk, and let's say it's my best friend Lindsay or it's Christina, and I'm like, I don't want to talk to them. That's a watch sign for me that I'm going back versus continuing to kind of become me. Because relationships are everything for me.
Do you feel like going through an especially dark time while this podcast was starting and how, you know, there are a lot of things that got you through it, but one of the things was showing up to do this podcast. If it was a time when you were less likely to answer the phone, having a project where you had to talk to people was at the very least a little therapeutic.
Totally. The interview that I did with Aisha, which was the first, which was the day that I had a plan. I remember my mom, when the interview was over, I was staying with her at the time. Because as I've said a number of times, like if you're on the outs and your mom's alive and you like her, like you go to your mom's. It's just where you go. And I wasn't going to go record the interview. I mean, I really, before, because I was staying with my mom, I had to go into Chicago to my apartment where the studio setup was. And I was like, I'm not going to go. And she's like, you're going to go. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go. So interviewing Aisha, what my mom said would happen happened, which was like, you're going to feel like yourself. Like this is what you're built to do. And, you know, it's like that opposite emotion action, something that I learned when I was in treatment for anxiety and depression this year. It was like your body, your brain, and your head are going to tell you to do things. And, you know, a lot of times, like acting opposite can be really helpful. So when I did that, and, you know, I knew Christina was counting on me, and I showed up. Like, while I was talking to Aisha, I remember having this experience of like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like, how is it possible that 10 minutes ago, I was like, there's pills and I can take them. And now I'm sitting at a computer recording the first episode of a podcast that I really don't, like, were it not, again, I'm going to say it 100 times, but like, were it not for like the team knowing what would happen next, because I was like, I don't know what's going to happen next. It just felt so taken care of. But I felt like myself for just an hour. And then I got off the episode and I was like, I better call for help. Like, I better call and, you know, go back to my mom's and get home safe, but like call my doctor and like, it's time to step it up. So it was really about, like the podcast is like my true self, you know. It really is. It's a chance for me. So it's like, on the one hand, I hope everyone listens to it because I think it's awesome and the people I talk to are awesome. On the other hand, I don't care if anyone listens, you know. Like, it's not the motivation. The motivation was to create something I'm proud of that I've wanted to do for a really long time, you know. And yeah, I'm really proud of it. And I'm excited for people to hear it, and I'm excited to hear what people think. And I would love for someone to like reach out to Tegan or reach out to Elise or reach out to Naomi and be like, I heard you on the podcast. Like, can I come support you and blah, blah. Like, oh my God, it'd be so great.
If you could interview any comic strip character from any comic strip from either your childhood or now, who would you interview?
Oh, comic strip, like Sunday comics? Or an animated character that I like?
Any animated character.
This is such an Arnie question.
I feel like comic strip characters are a little more withholding. There's a little less to go on.
Well, so. I mean, truthfully, have left that behind a long time ago. What comics are available.
Do you get a newspaper?
Yeah, can you go get USA Today? I think it might be Calvin and Hobbes, but like separately.
They're not like in couples counseling together?
No. I think Calvin is just such a great amount of mischief and like redemption and friendship in that comic strip. So I'd actually want to talk to him like independent of Hobbes. Like, who are you, the man, the boy, right? I'm assuming he grows up but maybe he doesn't. He never grows up. What's it like to never grow up, get older? That would be such an interesting question. Like, what's it like is he 6 or something, 5 or 6? Like, what's that like to just stay a kid forever? That's whenever I think of Calvin and Hobbes, I always think of him crashing. I don't even know if that's right, but maybe.
Yeah, writing is...
Is it a scooter, skateboard?
Wagon? Like
wagon.
A wagon.
Yes.
Ride down the hill.
The hill and steers with like, yeah. I mean, we were talking the other day. I think I was with you. I can't remember where we were about rolling down hills. Was I with you?
I think so.
Yeah. I think it was with your friends.
Look, I have so many conversations about rolling down hills.
I know. It's like, where do we begin? At the top of the hill. And I was just like, when was the last time you rolled down? I mean, it was definitely when I was a kid. And it's like, well, then go do it. Go do it right now. And it's like, oh, okay. I guess that's an option. So I guess yeah, it would be Calvin. I'd start with Calvin. So yeah. You have a heart out in 4 minutes.
Okay. Then I'm trying to think if there should be a... Well, Emily, thank you for coming in.
You're welcome.
It's been a real pleasure to have you here. We'll have you back sometime.
Thanks.
And I would like to say, as I, on this, I'm the surrogate for the listener. And
Yeah.
on behalf of the listeners, I would just like to say thank you. I love you, and I'll see you at dinner.